Dr. Magnus finally reached the familiar spot, crossing from the path to the two perfect grass that surrounded each neatly placed headstone. He came to the place where his heart had died so many years ago, and dropped to the ground, sitting cross-legged in front of the gravestone of his wife, Dr. Helen Magnus, devoted scientist, loving wife, killer butt. Tell you what, I don't know anybody that hasn't regretted the choice of going with a cut-rate headstone manufacturer. Or cremations, for that matter. Heard some stories about some cut-rate cremations that were just bodies getting chucked on a farm. But that's neither here nor there. How do you do, fellow kids? I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat administrator, former subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, Cologne aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter, Scuttle overlord, and welcome to the May 30th, 2020 episode of SCP Cafe. Have some interesting stuff. At least it's interesting to me. That's why I'm here. I don't know why you're here, but we have some stuff to go over today. 5 articles posted yesterday, all surviving, and a couple of interesting things I found out and about that I wanted to share with you guys. So, I am subscribed for some reason to dank memes from Site 19, which is a subreddit. If you haven't heard about it, that's just as well, if we're being honest. And a thing caught my eye last night of somebody comparing the document in their head versus the article when they start writing. And one of the comments from a user named Herelian, who teaches writing as their day job, offered some advice to let the first draft be terrible. It's gonna suck. People hate revision, but that's what the writing process mostly is. Write a really, really shitty first draft. Those were his words. And he linked a paper from Anne Lamott from 1997 called Shitty First Drafts. Oh, I'm sorry, point of correction, 1994, not 97. So this is older than most most of the members of Dank Memes from Site 19. Anyway, the gist of this thing is that people tend to have sort of a misconception about what the writing process really looks like. They think that really successful writers just, plop down in front of a desk, crack their knuckles, and they go, okay, I'm motivated and I'm going to write, really, really well right now, really beautifully. And that is not how it works for just about anyone. In her words, she says, I know some very great writers you love, who write beautifully and have made a great deal of money. And not one of them sits down routinely, feeling wildly enthusiastic and confident. Not one of them writes elegant first drafts. All right, one of them does, but we do not like her very much. We do not think she has a rich inner life, or that God likes her, or can even stand her. And so it goes with writing SCPs. Writing is writing. And I might throw a survey out there at some point just to see if I can get data to back this up. But I know for most people, writing from your first draft and having that be the thing is the exception to the rule. Just about everybody goes through a revision process. So when you look at a really beautifully written article, I think a lot of, newcomers to the site, a lot of, new readers, there's kind of a sense of despair because they feel like they can never get there. And it is because you're seeing the finished product and you didn't see all of the other things in between. She continues, that writers don't really know what they're doing until they've done it. They don't go about their business feeling thrilled. They don't type a few stiff warm-up sentences and then find themselves bounding along like huskies across the snow. One writer I know tells me he sits down every morning and says to himself nicely, "It's not like you don't have a choice, because you do. You can either type or kill yourself." We often feel like we're pulling teeth, even those writers whose prose ends up being the most natural and fluid. One of my favorite fiction writers, David Eddings, wrote in the prologue to a book that he released that was sort of companion materials and backstory for a series, that when the writing is clicking, when you're in the zone, it's the greatest dope in the world. And when it's not clicking, it's much like giving birth to a baby elephant. But if you are going to get paid for it, ultimately that's what you have to do. You got to do it. And the way to get around it, to get started, is forgive yourself for whatever's about to happen, and write a really shitty first draft. Whatever you want it to say, put it down. Know full well that you're the only person that's going to see this thing. Don't share this first draft with anyone. That's not what it's for. This first draft is just getting going. Throw out whatever's on your mind. Throw out something that sounds funny. Even if it doesn't make any sense with the rest of the article, throw it out there. Put everything that's on your mind out there. And from there you can get going. This is, not something that I think a lot of people, even when they hear the general idea of, first draft, second draft, blah, 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 they try really hard to get their first draft looking like their final draft. And maybe this is something new to try. Just fucking go for it. Write whatever the hell's on your mind, and you might just find that there's a couple of sentences in there that are really good, and now you've got some direction. Now you know where to go. That was what I wanted to bring up with y'all today. It's been on my mind. It's a really cool article. I will get this linked somewhere. I'll have it linked on scp.cafe. If you go to the post for the May 30th episode, it will be linked under additional reading, shitty first drafts. Now, what else have I got? Over on the nerd stuff front, many of you know the SCP Foundation Wiki is hosted by a provider called Wikidot. They have some proprietary software. There is nothing else quite like it on the internet, and that is a double-edged sword. It lets us do things that we can't do anywhere else. The bad news is we do things that we can't do anywhere else. We're stuck, and we have been for quite a long time. And it's a cool application. You can do a lot of stuff with it, and we have used it, to its fullest potential that we know of. Every time I would say that, somebody would prove me wrong. 4205 is still kind of the yardstick for me for stuff that's been published on the English wiki. Those that are really deep into the design and Wikidot fuckery aspect of it all are familiar with a Japanese user called 7happy7, who has done some absolutely mind-blowing stuff with the platform. So where am I going with this? Well, about 12 years ago, Wikidot released an open source version of their platform. It doesn't run on a modern operating system, and there's a lot of stuff left unsaid as far as how to get it set up. I had reached out to another guy that's been around Wikidot for a long time and had gotten a little virtual machine together, little Wikidot install in a box, and it worked surprisingly well. The trouble is it was also on an operating system that was about 12 years old. So for the last 2 days, I've been working on trying to get it to run in a modern world. Yesterday, I went from it doesn't work at all to I'm at least hitting the right web server and seeing consequences of my actions there. From yesterday to today, I went from there to I'm actually getting web pages to show up. I go to a certain location and the corresponding page is pulled up from a database. This is really exciting. This means we can potentially, and I'm going to say potentially because there have been some changes made to the code from 08 or 09 to 2020, but not as many as you might think. And we might be in a really good shape here to try and see what we can, there's two goals here. One is we want to understand our platform as much as we can, and this is the best way I know of to do that, is be able to really see it from the inside out, see it work through the issues that you might have in getting it set up, and that gets you some really good familiarity with it. But should the time ever come where we want to try and host the whole thing ourselves, it would be a lot easier to do so using highly analogous code like our own Wikidot platform than trying to use something like Scuttle. Scuttle is great for backups, and that is not to take away anything of what I've done over there, because without that, if the wiki were to die overnight, we'd be screwed without it. So it is serving its purpose quite well. But if I need to get Scuttle to properly handle the various versions of module list pages, or doing the offset trick that you'll see in something like SCP-2998, or any number of them nowadays, it is a lot of reinventing the wheel, and it's not fun. It's really not. I've done a few projects like that, and it's a lot of work for, what at the end of the day is like, this behaves mostly like what you were used to in the first place, but now there's a few caveats because it's not perfect. And I don't think that will be good enough if we ever need to strike out on our own. So good progress being made there. I'm not quite ready to share it with the public because for the most part it doesn't actually work, but I've at least got a workflow now to quickly see what the errors are, get them fixed, and overall, really promising stuff. Now, there were only 3 articles in the positives when I left you yesterday, and 2 more snuck in at the end of the night, and we find ourselves with 5 articles, all in the positives, just from yesterday. So, this is, 5 articles. We do a recap on that sometimes, but I'm not going to do the recap format. I'm going to try and keep this pretty quick and just give you the highlights on each of these. I'm going to start with a tale called It's Fine, But It Still Hurts. This is by Dr. Magnus. This is what I led in with. This was a really beautiful thing. This was, despite the Lol Foundation, devoted scientist, loving wife, killer butt, and the introduction of Dr. Wrights in with it. This is a really touching sort of piece, in Magnus sort of laying this out as I didn't need his author post to know what was going on, that this was all written for his wife. His wife is not dead. I want to make sure that, that's clear. But what I got most out of this was written for him. Like, he wrote this for himself. And I will always respect that. There are, a good number of articles out there on the wiki by some of our veteran writers that they wrote it not wanting or needing or even caring about the opinions of their peers, that this is something that they felt they needed to say to, continue with their day, however you want to put it. They needed it to be put out there, and they did it. And those make for really interesting pieces because for the most part, they tend to be things that are not obvious. They're things that you don't quite understand what story they're trying to tell, and they're so tied up in the author and what they're going through that compelled them to write the piece. And that was what I got out of this. Like, there is a story of sorts, but overall, the story is less important here, I think, than the emotions that were evoked. And on that basis, this was very easy +1 from me. There are a lot of little nods in this to what Magnus has going on currently with the wiki in real life, as it were, being promoted, having, more on his plate now, being in new teams. A lot of that is here, so if you're familiar with him, then you can get those things. But if you're familiar with, him and his wife, it does tell an entirely different story, and I was very, it feels really special to be able to see sort of that hidden story, and that made this really, really cool. Moving on now, SCP-5630, titled To Let Freedom Wing by Veralta. There were a couple of things in this piece that were really interesting to me. In the procedures, the first thing that really caught my eye was that a particular protocol is to be implemented in order to bolster press freedom rankings of certain nations under localized information campaigns and government deals. It's one of those that makes you wonder, what are we doing? What is it about this piece, about this thing, that makes us get involved there? We have what looks to be sort of an allegory for modern censorship, and it's set about 5 years in the future. And one thing that I think is really interesting with this piece is that it makes references to events that haven't happened yet, placing a good deal of importance on May 3rd, 2025, and mentioning public figures that don't actually exist, at the time of this recording. We'll see if this guy's a time traveler. But that was something I don't really ever see, is to have us actually attach names and really specific things to a near future event like that. I found that kind of cool. The thing is not terribly long, and when you look at it from the build-up to payoff perspective, I think it does really well, because it gives you a lot of things to sort of ponder, and it's well written enough to leave you kind of unsettled that, we're not talking about something all that far off, and we're seeing some, connections that could be made to the present day. So overall, pretty cool. Did enjoy this piece and did give it a +1. Moving on now, SCP-5725, titled We're Getting the Man Back Together Again by Weizhong. I haven't seen Weizhong in almost, maybe at least, around is a good word. It's a better word. Around 6 years. And I saw him for the first time in that amount of time just a couple of days ago, and he appears to have written a skip in 3 days. So very happy to see him back. He's don't know if he's gonna reprise his staff roles, but he's a really good guy and really happy to have him around again. So the good news is Weizhong as a writer has not missed a beat. This piece is outstanding. It is a quick read. It's very approachable, and we tell this story of a cursed guy, split into 3 pieces: a ghost, a skeleton, and the reanimated tissue, basically a bag of flab. For, it's a nice visualization. You basically can just sort of drag itself around and gurgle. And the spirit and the skeleton both want to assimilate the other 2 so they can become one unit and then expire, because according to the spirit, they think that if they do all that, they're going to go to heaven, and the skeleton says he thinks that, but only one of us gets to be the guy again, and the other 2 become nothing, and even the bag of flab gets a word in edgewise, and I really wasn't expecting the final sentence of this thing. I don't want to spoil it. It's a great read. It's quick. Do not miss it. This is a very hearty +1 from me. Moving on now, SCP-5403, and this one hurts my soul a little bit. I'm going to get comfortable here. And this is titled... I feel bad because I'm very obviously like not the target audience for this thing. Titled A/N, this is my first post, so no flamers, blocks, ! !1. By Speaka Terrible. This is currently sitting at +28. This is, like I said, I'm not the target audience here. At first glance, this thing reminded me a lot of 2721 in that we had this AI taking an interest in something that we're doing here on Earth, and rather than doing, sort of the expected thing where they try and, do evil AI things, instead we sort of, subvert expectations, and in this case, they're writing SCP fanfic, basically. This has a couple of things that did catch my eye, in that we've dated a lot of things with 1998, but a good number of these sayings and little, acronyms and phrases and such that are used in here weren't used in 98. I feel like a lot of this you could date to around 2004, which doesn't sound like a huge amount of time difference, but, it's the internet. The internet ages in dog years. So I did like that we had this really innocuous looking, juvenile fanfic, and we go from that to, we saw out on the internet this really, this thing that's laden with really sensitive keywords, and we alerted Site 15 to a possible broken masquerade, and we go from there. And it does actually kind of redeem itself a bit. We talk about this thing having the ability to see things that we don't understand. It knows things, and we don't know how it can know these things. Overall, a lot of it is done in this dialogue that I'm not terribly interested in reading. It's not my sort of thing. But I do respect that the thing is able to jump in and out of that tone back into a professional tone, and be able to make those switches very readily. That's really telling to me, because that means that the author is able to work in more than one medium. They weren't just trying to get this one thing out because they knew it really well. They can write in other formats, trying other things, and probably have it come out not half bad. The ending was more or less as I expected. So where does that leave me? Like, I'm not the target, the target readership here, so I tend to not, I kind of take that into consideration with regards to voting, and try and focus instead on, did this, meet all of the other things that I need a skip to do? Does it have, a professional tone where it makes sense to have that tone? Is it formatted correctly? Do we have any issues with spelling, punctuation, grammar, and so on? It passes all of those things. I've got nothing bad to say about it at all, honestly, aside from maybe having the years wrong in a couple of things, and that's fair enough. I lived through a lot of that stuff, and I was at an awkward age for a good chunk of it. Maybe that's why I don't like this thing quite so much. This is a begrudging +1, because I do appreciate the ability to write professionally here and mix it in with some stuff that is probably intentionally going to make some people cringe. So yeah, well done. If that was your goal, you did a great job. Now, last but not least, we have SCP-5095, titled We Need to Talk About 053. This was a co-write between Multiverse and a user who apparently nobody can agree on the pronunciation of their name. I was going to go with Gravy. Then somebody else pointed out it might be Grave, and then others are chiming in, but it might be Grieve. I need to get a hold of them to clear the air. Unfortunately, they're not online right now. I will go with Gravy. Greyve. But it might be Grave. Anyway. Now, I will say this was a really clever piece. There's a lot going on in few words. We have sort of a lead-in as with some discussion between some O5s, and then we have the article, and then we have more discussion at the end. And if I'm reading it right, if you're paying attention to all of those things in their proper context, this article tells an entirely different story than if you had not. That is not something I see all that often. We have this, neutralized class SCP with a top secret clearance, indicating basically the presence of sort of an anomalous worm that grows in the brain over a long period of time, 30 plus years, that will eventually start to really impair its host, and you end up eventually brain dead. It appears, and I'm going to place as much emphasis as I can on the word appears, that 053 is infected with this thing, and we have a vote from the remaining 12 members of the O5 Council on whether or not to relieve her of her duties, and the result of that goes directly into an ending that I found was really, really well done. I do not want to spoil this thing. It's one of these that is very much worth reading a couple of times. It's not so long that you're going to be really put out for giving this a really thorough read, because if it's doing what I think it's doing, the story's brilliant. And I'll come back to this one. I'm not sure exactly how or when, but I'm gonna come back to this at a later date, once everybody's had a chance to read it, and we'll fully spoil it then, and talk about it, in greater depth. And I who's to say, maybe I can bring one or both of these authors on to talk about it too. We're kind of, we're on Whose Line Rules for cafe episodes for a little bit. It's all made up, so we'll make something up for 5095. Outstanding piece. Very easy +1. So that was 5 +1s out of 5 articles, wasn't it? Pretty good day for articles May 29th. Tomorrow, there will probably be no show. I do have some other things I need to get taken care of going into June. I'm waiting on some news on a couple of things. If any of them pan out, then there will be an episode. But if not, I'm going to be trying to generally do, husband stuff, household stuff, get the place in good shape for June, because I have a lot of plans for June. So thank you, as always. Really appreciate all of you that are tuned in. Tell your friends. Always appreciate more listeners. If you thought the show was worth $1 and you feel like doing your part to help preserve the SCP Foundation Wiki, patreon.com/SCP Cafe has all patron funding go directly to the bills that cover doing exactly that through the Scuttle Backup Project. I discuss Scuttle pretty heavily there. Take a look if you're interested. If not, it's all good. Tell your friends. Until, well, either the 1st or tomorrow. We'll see. One way or another. Keep reading, keep writing, and goodbye, fellow kids.